views or tables that are on the ODS side. They include CSU GP demo, which is tells you who the people are. CSUS term info with many variations, which is if you ever have somebody ask you the question, how many students are there? That's a table to go to. But I'm going to note about difference it holds at the end of term GPA versus cum GPA. Section, which is the sections that students are enrolled in. The data codes, some about the course schedule, and the CRN info, which is again course information, student fees, and field of study, which you need a degree to understand exactly how that's all put together. But I didn't put it together. That's how it was delivered to us, and so I can explain it a bit. So if you have questions, I'm going to kind of go through some highlights. I put a whole bunch of information in here. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have or look them up if I can't answer them off the top of my head. CSU GP demo I'm not going to pull up because it contains all of the people here and their information. There is a couple of things in here that I thought are kind of interesting that I would add in here. Last name, you will occasionally find a last name that has a period in it. That is not a mistake. If you were Cher, then you would have a period in your last name because you have no last name. You have one and only one name. That's what you are. And so, but the system doesn't let us not put a last name in for you, so we put a period in there. And then there's a preferred first name field. Like one of our friends prior here, Alan Eddy. I don't know if any of you were here around long enough to know Alan Eddy. Alan was not his first name, but if you knew him, he was Alan Eddy. His first name was actually David, but if you were going to look up him, you wouldn't have looked him up that way. So first name, that's also used when you create your e-name, your proper name address. So mine is vicky.johnson at colorado-state.edu, but if I wanted to be called vic.johnson, then I would have work at my preferred first name. And then we now have a preferred last name field as well for the EID side of things, so that if you were to get married and you were, let's say, a professor who had written lots of stuff and you were famous with one name, you could put a preferred last name in there that would, again, make that change to the EID side. Well, could be used to do that.
So we should probably add this red text to our data dictionary comments that these folks probably use.
You can if you would like. That would be okay. So this is mostly biographic and demographic. Who are you? Where's your address, your email, cell phone number? Again, I would note to you guys confidential information. There's a confidential indicator here. If that's set to yes, then you need to handle that person's data very much appropriately. They don't want their data shared, so very confidential. And then there is an error here. We've changed it from you to N, so you're male, female, or an N. And N is basically unknown. We don't know if you're a male or female. And then ethnic and ethnic description, those we used to use, but we no longer use, and there's all these pieces down here at the bottom: Hispanic, Latino, American, Indian, Asian, Black. So these fields are no longer. If you were in some of the historical data, you would see the data up here and nothing down here. So
At what point did we change our definition for ethnicity?
I can't tell. It's been years.
Yeah.
Long time? Okay.
At least a couple of years.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's been a while. So it's going to, and then another piece of information I thought might be interesting to you guys would be the international flag. So, and this can be interesting at times. It's initially based on your visa type. So if you have a visa type entered, then that's the preference. So you're either a resident or non-resident based on that visa type. If we don't have that, then there is some coding that occurs in the international office that we can look at. And then lastly, we look at a person's application. So if they said they were they applied as an international application, then we would say you're international. It's not yet solid, but it's our best indicator. And if we have no information on you, then we say you're not international. We default to not international. Okay, moving on to some more interesting information. Term. So, and the other thing that I would point out, and I point out here a few times, is that this information does not contain deceased persons. For the most part, we remove deceased people, and that is so that there's no problem with you running some report and trying to send them a letter or anything like that. We want to be very, very careful with how we communicate with families of deceased students or deceased persons, so they are removed.
Quick question back on the GP demo.
Yeah?
So the nation field is empty for U.S. students?
Yes.
Is it also empty for people who have not indicated geographical? Is it safe to assume that blank means United States?
Yeah, it's safe to assume that blank means United States. It's not. It's related to their address. So if they are here in the United States, it has no indication. They could be living in the dorms, or they could be living on House Street. It doesn't indicate that they're international or not. It just indicates their address. And instead of putting U.S. so that everybody would print it all the time, we chose to leave it null so that it made your printing easier if you're printing an address. You didn't have to always remove U.S. or United States of America from their addresses. Any other questions on GP demo? So I like to say, when people ask me a question about students, there's 100 different ways to answer the question of student, because I could be an admitted person who was just an applicant who was just admitted. I now have a student record, but do you consider me a student? If you're really wanting to see who's enrolled, who's here this term, then this is the file to tell you that kind of information. And there's a lot of different variations of term info. Now, one thing I wanted to note is term contains their primary program and major information, but not any of the rest of it. Not second majors, not minors, very little information. And we'll talk about CSU field of study. So if you're interested in minors, who has my particular department's this minor, then this is not the place to go. CSU field of study is, or if it's a second major.
So certificates, if they're a degree-seeking student, also applied and admitted to
Then
a
the certificate will not be here, because their primary program should be their degree-seeking program. So field of study, where it should go. Nobody was crazy. I had to be informed of how to translate terms, and you can see it, but there is some logic behind it. I thought, so its year starts out with the year 2015-90. So 90 is the fall, 60 spring, 10 is spring, 60 summer. If you think of that first digit as a month, it'll help, because if it's January, what month are you in? You're in spring. If it's June, what month, where are you? You're in summer. If it's September, then you are in fall. So it helps if you understand that first digit kind of relates to a month, and then that makes what 10, 60, and 90 make more sense, at least it does to me. And I've got a list of the different kinds of term info, information. So the AH, academic history, contains all information for term information. Because that guy is really slow, we created a recent, AH recent, and it contains, and we'll go over it a little bit more, but last, I think, 7 terms worth of data. And then census, we'll talk a little bit more about too, but census, there's a cur and an end of term, cur and hist. Again, we'll talk more about those in a little bit. There's end of term, which is EOT. And then there's cur, fall, spring, and summer. I did put the wrong information. I will correct it. End of term I copied from Census, and so it doesn't occur in the time frames here. Those are copied down from Census. End of term happens at the end of the term. So for fall, it would be in December, and that's when you get it. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about those guys here.
Vicky, when you see you copied it down, you didn't get it off the data dictionary then that's on our webpage?
No, these are somewhat Vicky's.
Okay. So probably more accurate descriptions.
So here's a little bit more information, some detail about those guys. So as we talked before, AH is very slow. It contains the current and all previous terms worth of data. So if you're trying to do something that's beyond 7 terms, then you need to go to AH and be very, very, very patient because it's pulling so much data. AH recent is kind of not quite frozen, but it is a point in time kind of type stuff, and correct me here. It does not contain current data. It does have the data from the previous 7 terms. It will return much faster, and right now, today, it contains 2009-10 through 2015-17, or 15-16.
So it's actually 7 years.
7 years.
Not 7 terms. Yeah.
Cur, fall, spring, and summer. Well, once you get fall as FAL, SPR is spring, and SMR is summer, what does current term mean? Usually that's pretty obvious. It's whatever term we're in. But current term, when you're in that middle of Christmas break, or you're between spring and summer, there's some uniqueness here that you need to understand. So we keep the current term until we've processed end of term. So until we've done end of term processing, so in fall, until we get to that point where we do it stays, cur stays the same as fall. Cur stays the same as spring until we've got done with spring end of term. This means that since we don't do end of term processing until, so you have finals week, and then the next Tuesday grades are due, and at the end of that week, we have, usually that Friday is when we do end of term processing. So since finals end on a Friday for spring, and Monday is the start of summer session, in that first week of summer session, cur term is still spring because we have not yet processed spring end of term. So hopefully that helps to clarify what that guy is. Now, then for current census, current term, and census history, I tried to write down here with help from the registrar's office that census for fall and spring occurs 12 school days in. That's a Wednesday officially. So if somebody's talking about census, that's Wednesday. But we phrase our data on the Friday after that. So on that Friday is when we capture the census data, and summer it is the 8 weeks in, usually in June.
So
Yeah.
Vicki, can I pause
Yeah.
you there? So, you said that, for the campus, it kind of starts on a Wednesday, but from an ODS reporting view, we really do that Friday night, so most people would actually look at the data the Monday following that weekend.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, and also, Vicki, the Sunday night schedules do not run because
Yep,
of
that's,
Census.
yep, you're correct. So I want to emphasize that we capture that data just like these guys are saying Friday evening after the ODS refresh. The reason for that is because we're collecting admissions information, and that's one of the key files that we are collecting at census time. And you can see CSUS applicant freeze file. That isn't created until Friday night, so we have to wait until after that's created so that it has all the correct data for our census file. And so here's the different tables that are captured at census. Now, CUR contains only the current term that we're collecting the data from. History, on the other hand, contains all of the other previous terms. So if you're looking for this term and all previous, you'd have to put the two of them together. So the current term does not exist on the history. Is that clear? Current term does not exist on the history file. It only exists on current. Lots of times people, they're just reporting on the current term. That's all they really want to know, so we kept it separate. Okay? End of term is very similar, and it occurs, like I said, we have grades on that Friday, and then we have the main, so we finish it after that, but that week after grades are due. But like this time, grades are going to be due on December 22nd. We would like to be on vacation on Christmas Day and not be trying to cut files. And also there is work, any cleanup that might happen in between there. So we do allow, there is some more grades that trickle in after that. So it's sometime after that. And if you want to know exactly when, look on the registrar's page in their is it critical dates now? And so it'll tell you exactly when. So these are the files that are captured. Again, end of term CUR is only the current term, and that term only. History is all the previous end of terms, but not the current.
Are you going to address why we don't run the schedule over the weekend?
Yeah, in just a moment here. So the other thing about end of term is that we run the end of term at noon on that Friday, and we actually create all of these files on noon on Friday. Okay? So we don't, so for census, we are waiting until after the ODS refresh on Friday night. So we do not run a refresh on Sunday because there's nobody there looking at any of that data. Well, I shouldn't say that. There IR's running reports, and people may be running reports and things like that. But really, people aren't staying over that weekend, for the most part, to verify that that data looks good Saturday morning. And therefore, we found that at least one time, maybe twice, I know one time, we ran into a problem, and it was so painful because if we refresh on Sunday night, we can't recreate that same point in time data. So we hold the ODS. We do not refresh on that Sunday after census. But we have begun to ease up on the Sunday after end of term because really we're capturing Thursday night's data. Because we're capturing at noon on Friday, and the ODS refreshes haven't happened on Friday night. So end of term data is at noon, so it's really the night before's data. And people had a chance to look at the data and make sure that it's good data.
So, Vicki, just to summarize some of that, so if I'm a novice report writer, census is kind of frozen at the beginning of the term. So if I see views that have CEN or census in there, then that's frozen at the beginning. EOT, it's frozen kind of at the end of a semester or the term. And if it doesn't have either EOT or CEN in it, then it's views that could be a little bit more dynamic data that is kind of changed as students drop courses or change majors and that kind of stuff.
That's, for the most part, true, yes.
Okay.
I mean, that's a good generality.
So another question for you, Vicki. So end of term current is taken at the end of the semester.
Yes.
How long does that stay? So current I think of as current semester, but at the end of fall, we're going to take a snapshot of end of term.
And so when you're in spring, Kerr is pointing back to fall until you hit the end of term of spring, and then it becomes spring term. So current is current as of when it was captured, so you kind of have to know when it was captured.
Okay.
So it's the current data that was captured. So at end of term, you know, the very next Monday, we're going to start switching current over to be the next term.
So end of term in the spring will contain fall data until the next end of term.
Well, and think of it like this, Steve. So you're looking at an end of term file. So what is the most current end of term that has completed? If you're in spring, spring hasn't completed, so there is no end of term data. So you have to look at what was the last end of term that could have possibly been created.
Makes sense. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. So one thing that I did want to note is that end of term does not contain CUNY GPA information. So if it only contains end of term, okay, and end of term only contains the term GPA. What did you get for the GPA for the classes that you took for that term? If you want to see for your time here as an undergrad or a grad or professional, then you need to go to CSUG GP Academic, and then it's level based. So there's one that's for undergrad, and that's probably the easiest one for us all to think about. For graduate, there is a CUNY GPA, and it is kind of similar to what you're thinking about as undergrad, but grads don't think that way. Okay, they have a GS6 program of study, and the regular classes, and for overall, what they call a regular GPA and an overall GPA, and those are defined there. So for them, these are the GPAs that count for the graduate student, not the CUNY GPA like we would normally think of a cumulative GPA. And then professional vet meds, the PRs, they're in there. If I'm correct, and tell me, they think more instead of a grade, because most of their grades they have a really generally high GPAs. They rank their students 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 within the class. So they think of ranking. All right. So on the end of term only, these highlighted columns exist: the term GPAs and the Dean's List information. So if you're looking for term GPAs or Dean's List information, it's on the end of term file and only the end of term files. The rest of this is related to all of the other terms. So campus, main, and then the MC campus is, what is the right name?
CSU online?
Online.
Main and main distance or continuing ed.
Okay, so if you're okay with me saying continuing ed, then I'll just say continuing ed.
That works.
All right. Another thing to note, residency switched back in summer of 2010 if you're doing stuff going back, so for the last 5+ years. And you've got undeclared C is the resident and non-resident, X non-resident not determined. Generally, this number is very, very small, so I would think of the last three as your friends. But so like for continuing ed, if they're admitting somebody and they don't need to go through the residency process to figure out if they can truly be counted as a resident or non-resident, then they would fall into that X category.
Exactly. Which is the dominant portion of reference.
Now, there's certain things that I wanted to kind of point out to you that's within here. So student classification. You'll see values like this. And if you think of the 11, the 21, the 31, and the 41 for the undergraduates, those are based on their credits. So X number of credits means you're a freshman, then the next credit after that you're a sophomore, then a junior, then a senior. The difference between the 10 and 11, or the 20 to 21, 30, 31, 40, 41, is that these are determined by an attribute. So we put it on there. An example would be a guest student. I'm a guest student, I live across the street, I want to come to take a class, but I have to be considered a junior in order to take that class. Can you please make me a junior? They don't have the credits to become a junior, so we can put an attribute on them to say they are a junior so that they can register for the class that they're attending upon registering. And they work through admissions and the registrar's office to do that. So that's the difference. The ones that end in 11, 21, the ones that end in the ones are the credits, the ones that end in the zeros in the undergrads, those are all based on an attribute. Somebody decided that you are poof a senior. All right? But then it's not necessarily proof. But then from that point on, the senior post-bachelors, senior second bachelors, and the grads, masters, PhDs, and the vet med levels, those are all attributes. You cannot determine those based on the number of credits. I could be a graduate student who's just starting here and have 0 credits. So you can't say I'm a graduate student because I have a certain number of credits, or I could have come through my whole undergraduate degree and, and have enough. I could have changed, whatever. But so those are all determined and put on through attributes. So, student levels. So undergrad is pretty easy, grad, professional, vet med. So SI is self-improvement. Those are the into students for now. So those are the students who are not fully admitted to the believe that's a true way to say it, not fully admitted to the university. And so therefore, we put it in here, they're studying academic English or general English in preparation to becoming a full student. GZ are cooperative programs. I know we have like Colorado School of Public Health, where the student actually is admitted to a university like DU, but they are here. They may be in the dorm. They're taking this, some classes that are same class as some other students that are here, and some that are maybe unique to their major. But they are not our students in our reality. Even though they're here taking classes and all those kinds of things, we can't count them to the state as our DU counseling. Okay. Student types. You have a new student, transfer student, or a returning student, and then you can have a non-degree student, and then you can have continuing. A non-degree student will never become a continuing student because they have to reapply every single term. But a new readmit or transfer student will be that for one term and one term only. That's identifying what they are as far as being admitted, and after that they're a continuing student. And then there is an admissions population. So how did you come in here? So you could have applied as a domestic or an international. You could have applied through Online Plus, or you could have applied as a second BA or second BA international. And then I'm going to mention this, and then that there are sites out there, and so sites can tell you a couple of things. They can tell you a location, like Windsor, so they can tell you where a class is being given. Could be Denver, could be Tokyo, could be wherever. And then we have site for mostly graduate programs, and that is usually when a couple of departments or have work cooperatively on a given program. The site tells you who gets credit. All right. Any quick questions on term before we leave term? If you get blurry-eyed, you know it's okay. All right, because we're going through a lot of information here. Section, these are courses or sections that students are enrolled in for whatever term that we're talking about. And I want to mention that you need to translate here. You need to understand translations. So, and without going into the history of it, we have equivalency. So on section, an ID is the same as CSU ID. Person UID is the same as PITM on term. So if I was looking on term, academic period would be term. Sub-academic period is a part of term. So summer might be first 4-week session, the full term, summer term, or those kinds of type things. And then course reference number, you'll sometimes see as CRN. That's kind of a unique number within the term that identifies that section.
So Vicki, the field names on the left are kind of an ODS name, whereas the field names on the right are names used
CSU.
by Banner, I think, right? The
Nope.
Banner system, just
No,
CSU?
where they came from was ISIS, which was prior.
Okay.
Trying to make it be a little bit easier to move from our prior system to the Banner system. We do not include W drop classes where the final grade's W, so those are removed from section. We do not include any transfer coursework here, and there's special logic that's used to determine the credit type, and this is how credit type is how we report things to the state. So that Z, that's related to those GZs. So if the course that they're taking, the class that they're taking is specifically for those guys, then they get translated to ex-CSU, not CSU. We don't get to count those guys. If you have a guest student and they're taking an RI class, they get translated to CT, course translation. They get credit. And then what you can do is there's CSU course credit type that has the attribute and the translation of the attribute at the section level. So like for an RI class, most of the students in that RI class are going to be counted as RI students. So this is at a section level. But for that guest student, we translate their RI credit to CT because we don't get to count them to the state. All right? That kind of stuff. And I'm not going to go through. There's an academic history, a census, and a term, and CUR, and an end of term, and CUR, fall, spring, summer. That's all very similar to the term that we just went through. And there are no additional columns added at end of term. So these are all the section tables. these are all the fields that are on that section file. Lots and lots of data. And there are spots for grades, but so let me say it this way. So think of a grade, a professor enters a grade, and a professor can change that grade. But on that Tuesday after finals week, we tell them you got to have it done by then, and you got to have your grades entered. And then after that, we do something called rolling the grades to academic history. And so once we roll the grades to academic history, that's when the students can see their grades. So keep that in mind. So that's enough. That's much I'm going to do there. So data codes. So this is something that we made up, but we find very interesting. So entity UID, because this can be for a non-person as well as a person, to a certain degree. I'm not going to go in. If you want more details, ask me, and I'll take you to the site and tell you or whatever. Or I will talk more about it. But mostly these are people. This is your PITM or your person UID equivalent. And so this does not include every data code that exists in Banner. So if you have access in Banner, you won't see all of them here. Some of them are hidden, especially some of the ones that are related to accounts receivable and business and financial services. Some of them may be related to collections and might contain some personal information that we don't want everybody on campus to have access to. So there are 0 to 20 attributes. So for a person, they will always have a data code, and that tells you what kind of information is going to follow. They may or may not have a term on there. Some data codes require terms, some do not. So a first generation student is a data code. It does not have a term, and it just has the data code, nothing else. This person is a first generation student. Other things like registration ready, where we ask the student all kinds of questions, that has a term because it's very term dependent. I'm asking the students these questions for this term. And, like in summer and fall, we may be asking them questions for 2 different terms at the exact same time. And then each attribute, so for any given data code, attribute 1 is unique, but it is the same for everybody with that data code. And then so there's it will tell you how many attributes that data code has, and then for each of the attributes you'll see a description and a value. And you'll see all 20 of those sitting there. And then the user ID, who last updated it, and the date that they last updated it. Okay? So you really have to understand the data code that you're looking for and to know what to expect. But once you start looking at a data code and a specific data code, all of the data will be the same. Okay, course schedule. So this is related to section information, but we're now taking the people off of this information, and so flip over here a little bit. Course section. So there's multiple terms, so you can see that I asked for a particular term. So you can see this, and you'll see this is a ODS related thing. They like to take the subject and the course and put it together and call it the course identification. But if that you still need the CRN or what they call, well, this is actually section course related information, because it doesn't contain the CRN, pardon me. This is course-related information. So what terms of courses is here. the most part.
CRN is the next question.
Yeah, the CRN, the CRN.
I think it's
So
the
that
next
could
query.
be schedule. Yeah, it'd have to be in here. Instruction method, yeah.
There was course number.
Course number, yeah, that's just the number of the course, that's not the CRN. So that's what you see here, the subject and the course. So this is course level information. And that's why you're probably seeing multiple for the same. So here you see biology 120, both for the same year, both for the same term. And now here's where you're seeing there can be an honors lab and a regular lab. So it's really the schedule type that information, how's that course offered?
And do you have the section in there, you said?
No,
100?
do not have the section here. So where we're gonna go to get the section information is this one that's the CRN related. So again, you have the course identification. Now you have the course reference number. That you'll hear me calling the CRN some of the time. And then for that section, you now can see that this is lab 26, so it's the same subject, same course number, and section 1, section 2, lab 1, lab 2, recitation 1, recitation 2. And now you can begin to see that section is the LL section. If it was, or you would see another section if it was the HL section, another section that was the recitations, lab, lecture lab, recitation, those kind of type things. You can see if it's gradable or not. You can see if it is their maximum enrollment and actual enrollments. You can see who the primary instructor is, and only the primary instructor. You can see the percentage of their responsibility, so that should give you some idea of if they're the one and only guy, or if that's 50, then there's somebody else out there who's got 50% responsibility, or possibly. And then at the end of the term, they have to give us the delivery method. The faculty have to give us a delivery method because that's required in reporting to the state. So did I teach this face-to-face? Did I teach this online? Did I teach this? Is this a test out class, where you take the class and you get the credit for it, those kind of type things. And then you see a time, okay? Sometimes classes will meet Monday and Wednesday at such time, and then on Thursdays they meet at different time, different place. This is at least giving you one of them. Where do they meet at least once? And then when do they meet? So this is this class can meet Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever. And meeting hours, meeting types, that kind of type stuff. Okay? So this one's section related, the other one's course related. All right. I said it right here. This is course level, not section level data. And we do capture that at Census and at let's hold that stuff there. And here's this. So just a couple of little things that might be of interest to you. The CRNs do have a pattern. So if they start in the spring, then the CRN will start with a 1 or 2. If they start in summer, it'll start with 5. If they start in fall, should start with a 6 or 7. And sections are some sections are rolled from one term to another term, so they may have the same CRN from term to term to term. That's why they're not unique. They might be unique in the fall semester if they're rolled, but if you add another section, then it's a new number. So you can't just rely on the CRN number and say, well, I'm going to search across. You might be pretty lucky, you know, if that section's offered every fall semester, you know, from here to Kingdom Come, but I wouldn't bank on it. Let's see. So we talked about the primary instructor and the meeting time. It's not. So if you want to know all of the instructors, you can look at instructional assignment. If you want to find all the meeting times, you can look in the meeting time file. And there is a column called RAM-CT indicator. We use that for Blackboard. We're now in the process of moving. This is the last year on Blackboard. We've pushed almost all the classes to Canvas. And whereas with Blackboard, the instructors had to say, I want this class in Blackboard. I'm going to teach it online, or I want it in Blackboard for whatever reason. And that would be valid. But for Canvas, when we moved to the learning management system of Canvas, we put them all in there. So we don't use this RAM-CT indicator anymore. So. That kind of data. All right. Student fees. So for your average Joe Blow student, you can just look in the student fees file and see if they're full or part-time, not applicable